Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Rich Goldstein here, host of the Innovations and Breakthroughs podcast, where I feature top leaders and the path they took to create change. Past guests include Kevin King, Rick Cesari, and Brandon Young. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 29 years. So if you're a company that has software, a product, or a design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you could contact my team at speaktolarry.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. Returning to the podcast today is Yoni Kozminski. Yoni is the founding partner of MultiplyMii, Escala, and South Col, all of which help e-commerce businesses to grow. He is also the host of the top 2% podcast, Successful Scales. So I'm very pleased to welcome back here today, Yoni Kozminski. Welcome, Yoni.
Rich, the pleasure and honor is all mine. Thanks so much for having me back on.
Absolutely. And because I know there's a lot to talk about. You've always been involved in helping businesses to scale, like the different companies that you have with Escala and MultiplyMii. You're really about helping people create processes and to create team that they need to make their companies more valuable. And now you've also launched South Col. Let's just talk a little bit about South Col and what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So South Col is really the evolution, like you said, of a couple of the other businesses that I've been involved in MultiplyMii, where we help find high value, low cost talent, and with Escala, where we help build systems, SOPs, org strategy and structure, and actually help companies grow, or scale rather than just grow. And that's always been a really driving underlying focus of mine and of Lippy, my co-founder. And we've also brought in a third partner, Brandon. And on the back of all of that, we've come together with GW Partners, formerly known as GWA. They're a premier investment bank in the e-commerce space. They've done well over $1 billion in transaction value. And Sellers Fi, formerly Sellers Funding, who have hundreds of millions of dollars out in loans to e-commerce businesses, helping them grow. So we've brought to the three parties together to create a joint venture called South Col, where what we're effectively doing is we are injecting capital. So we have a $50 million facility to invest in e-commerce businesses to grow them to exit over a 2-year period. And it's a unique offering in that what we're doing is we're saying, founder, you're the most integral part of the business or senior leadership team, depending on the size of the business we're investing in. We want to accelerate your growth. We want to accelerate what that multiple is going to look like. We're going to help build that exit roadmap with you and then hold you accountable, holding your hand and providing resources and services every step of the way, all the way through to exit. Obviously, GW Partners, that is what they do. So, that's really the short of it, Rich. That's, in a very, very succinct definition, that's what South Col is.
Got it. So it's kind of like a natural extension of the work that you've done with Escala and MultiplyMii, where in essence you're putting your money where your mouth is, right? Like you know how to help businesses increase their valuation. So now you're actually directly investing in them because you know it works.
Spot on. And what's more is in our model, we take a minority position on performance. So if we're not able to achieve a material growth and success in the business, then we see nothing. So we're really putting our money where our mouth is. Right. And
because you can get it done, right? And so you can do that. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's so much to say about how you increase the value of a business. But what are the things that you see or that regarding preparing that go beyond what most people do when they're just preparing for exit?
Yeah. So especially if you look at sort of the years gone by and the rise of the aggregator, there's been a lot of talk about, exit preparation. How do you make sure that the numbers look right? How do you make sure that you're in the right position, that you actually hand over the business in a state that makes sense and that you can actually build a sellable asset? And what we feel, and a big part of our thesis is that, a lot of it was focused on that back end of just, let's get, to put it bluntly, to put a bit of lipstick on a pig, send it off and sell the thing, and off you go, package it up. And where we saw the gap is that to have material impact on a business, it can't be achieved in a 3-month period, and often not in a 6-month period. And for those of you who don't know, businesses, especially in the e-commerce space, are typically sold on an EBITDA multiple. And to have a material difference on that number, on what your profitability looks like inside of a 3-month period, it's pretty challenging, especially if you haven't really planned for it. So when we talk about getting ready for exit, we're talking about how do we grow that EBITDA and how do we grow that multiple? How do we create multiple expansion over the course of a 2-year period? And I mean, Rich, I'm happy to jump into all the ways in which we look at the equation, but maybe I'll pause, take a breath, and ask if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, perfect. I just recap a couple things and we'll continue on that road. So, so first of all, what you're saying is that typically when a e-com business sells, there is your profit, your EBITDA, and then there is the multiple. And most of the time when people think in terms of preparing for exit, they're looking at like, well, okay, how do we make sure that our numbers are a little bit better so that we could influence the value that way? Because it's like, if you say like, oh, you know what, we're spending too much on PPC. Like, let's see if we can get that number down a little bit. And so then we can increase our profit a little bit so that we can maybe show a little bit better number that is then being multiplied by a certain multiplier. And that multiplier has to do with how attractive the business is overall, right? So you're talking about, it's kind of like if you were selling a house and you said, well, you know what, well, like we want to flip this house. Why don't we just go and we'll clean it up real nice. Maybe we'll do a paint. Maybe we'll paint the porch, so we'll just increase it a little bit. Versus like, hey, you know what? If we put in a new kitchen and we took down this wall, then investing just a little bit, we'll get a lot more for this house. So like, it's like that doing the work is kind of what you're talking about. So yeah, if that resonates, then just, let's go with that and tell me a bit more about how you do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that resonates. That is absolutely spot on. And I love that analogy because ultimately it is about, come back to it. It's not about putting lipstick on a pig. It's actually making this thing much more attractive for when you're looking to sell your house. You're getting the paints of co, you're doing the landscape, and you're doing all of the things that are actually going to have a material impact on that upside potential. And so when we look at it from an e-commerce perspective and how we can actually maximize exit value, it's not just about financial cleanup is a really common thing and something that I think in a lot of ways can be done in that last 3 months, but to actually build the right financial engineering and to make a material shift and work toward an actual goal, a profitability goal, that takes time. When we talk about things like product pipeline, you can't do that in 3 months when you're saying, right, prospective buyer, let's talk about, coming back to like the aggregators for a second. A lot of the challenges that they had was that they were buying these businesses where they were taking the most valuable thing out of that. And that was the founder that had all the ideas on how to expand the product. And in 30 days, the founder was gone. Now, if you can actually build the roadmap for the next 10, 15, 20 products to continue to build that brand and launch a few of them and then sell that asset with that upside opportunity, anyone who's looking to potentially acquire the business is looking for how can they turn that acquisition into dollars as quickly as possible, pay it off, and then continue to grow that asset. So things like building out that product pipeline is really integral. Outside of compliance, where if you don't have that in the right place, obviously your legal and very importantly, your IP law and all the IP that you have embedded inside of that is critical. I can say from my standpoint, and I don't want to not step on your toes here, Rich, but I don't want to talk out of turn, just knowing that
By
you're
all
the
means. I'd love to hear
subject matter
stories
expert.
about IP and its role in exits.
But ultimately, I mean, when we look at it from the South Col investment standpoint, if there's no defensibility, so if there's nothing that is particularly unique to that brand or that product, and to be really blunt, if someone in China can just knock it off and drop the price by 50%, 70%, and there's no defensibility around it, then that business is way too geared toward a degree of risk that, from us, when we talk about a 2-year roadmap, so much can happen in that time frame. We're not going to take on that risk. So making sure that there is some form of trade or design pattern, making sure that there is something that actually we can turn around and say, no, brand registry, we own this IP. This is our own. It's critical. And I would say for anyone looking to build for exit, if you're at that point and you don't have that built into your business, you should look to find a way. And, again, I don't know all of the intricacies when it comes to actual technical IP law, but I think that's one of the things when it comes to IP law that you really need to pre-think these things through well before exit, because, I'd love to actually hear you correct me if I'm wrong here.
No,
Rich,
you're not. I mean, it's like you like, you don't need to know all of the details of how it works. It's the important thing is that that it's important. That if you're looking at a business, seeing if they're a good candidate for you to want to get involved in, you're looking at IP, and that other people are looking at it. So that it's worth a look. And that's half the battle, is just knowing like that it's worth the look, and it's worth trying to maximize with the right people that can help you do that.
Absolutely. It's integral, and it's part of our framework and our roadmap when we're building for exit and building our 2-year acceleration timeline. IP is, there's literally a section that is all dedicated to IP. So it's critical. Another area that we look at as well is it's operational excellence. So if you're selling your business and you are the individual that has all of the ideas and all of that IP up inside of their head around how things operate and what's happening, then you are an absolute key man or woman risk to the business. And for any prospective buyer, making sure that you have every aspect of the business well documented so that there's a degree of clarity does a couple of things for your business. On one hand, it makes any prospective buyer, or rather opens up the prospective buyer pool, because all of a sudden, rather than having to get on a call with 100 companies, they could have a snapshot and a look at some of the clear processes and how the operation actually runs, and what are some of the key process maps and components that go into running this business. And they can understand pretty quickly how simple or technical the business is and what that looks like. So working on that operational excellence, it absolutely grows that SDE and can have multiple expansion implications. Again, when we talk about who's buying it and what that bidding war may look like if there are enough interested buyers. So it's really, really important. I got a few more for you, Rich, if you're looking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. These are all helpful insights.
So, another couple of areas we look at are marketing optimization and branding as well. I know one of the big things that we've seen as a shift coming back to sort of 2 and 3 years ago, where it was, somewhat of the Wild West in the e-commerce space. We had, COVID hit. There was a massive growth component. People were no longer spending their money on travel and activities. It was all purchasing of home goods. There was no more travel. And so we saw this explosion. And, I'll never forget early on, we were already sat firmly in the e-commerce space, and that was where we cut our teeth. And everyone was saying, we're 5 years into the future now, in a matter of months in terms of the investment and the growth. And there's been this COVID hangover, and there's definitely growth. E-commerce isn't going anywhere. But I think one of the really important shifts that we've seen is that people aren't just buying any brands anymore, or rather any product-based, quote unquote brands. They're now really looking to invest in people that have invested in building out their brand and having real marketing. And coming back to the IP piece, it's not just about what you can defend from a legal standpoint, but it's also what does your ideal client profile what does that potential customer or client, what do they see and feel, and what are the intangibles about your brand that you're building that draws them to it and makes it valuable and says, I will spend, I think a really good example of this is Hydro Flask, for example. You have brands like Hydro Flask and I forget the tumbler. I think they had a patent on for like 15 years. It just recently expired. And so loads of people are now building out these things and these tumblers and these heating, cooling, drink bottles. And they're, maybe $5-10. They're landing them selling them for a very small markup. You're still buying Hydro Flask, which is effectively the same product at a $40 or $50 shell out because they've built such a strong brand behind them. So coming back to my point, my very long-winded point here is that investing in brands is paramount for what the prospective buyer is going to look at and what you're actually selling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like you want to anticipate what it is that they're investing in and what they see and what makes it positive.
Absolutely. And then the last and in my personal opinion, but that's just how I operate, the last important and less sexy component here is everything that relates to supply chain and logistics optimization. So really investing in understanding what are the level of efficiencies that can be created, especially as you continue to scale and grow the business. What are the levers that can be pulled? Because when that starts to become, from 10,000 units to 100,000 units to 1 million units, being able to shave 10 and 15 and 20% off make a tremendous difference.
Yeah, and it's also with supply chain, that's another potential risk, right? There's a risk to a buyer depending on how you have your supply chain set up, and so the extent to which you kind of find those potential problems and solve them ahead of time is de-risking, and that it makes it more valuable, taking some of the risk away.
Absolutely. So that's definitely some of the ways in which we approach it and we look at it. One of the ways in which us as South Col get started after we go through our diligence phase and really audit and understand that this is the right founder that we want to invest in. We'll build this 2-year roadmap, and inside of it, we have almost it looks like a spider web in terms of how we lay this out, where we look at product, brand, marketing, operations, and business management, and we block them in 6-month increments, where we're looking at, what do we expect to achieve in these 6-month increments across each of those 5 categories that I just shared, being realistic and front loading the things that are going to take time. If there's a heavy investment, let's say, into global expansion and to find the right 3PL and freight forwarder and setting up VAT and compliance into Europe and things like that, that's going to take time. That's not a 3 or 6 month execution. And then that's on top of it having to actually sell and start to see that thing turn a profit. So we'll plot this whole thing out and we'll work with the founders of these businesses that we're invested in to make sure that they're actually hitting these goals. And we deploy management consultants in. And I mean, I could keep talking about the business until the cows come home, but maybe I'll pass it back over to you, Rich, before I go on too much about it.
Yeah, and so I guess in terms of all those things that you look to create, in terms of shifting the processes and such, it takes time, and a lot of people that are looking to exit their businesses, they'd be surprised by that recommendation that they spend 6 months, a year, maybe more, to be able to position the company for a better multiple to get more money. And there's a expression in business planning world that I love, which is that good exit strategy is just good business strategy. So it's kind of like they might be they might be looking at it like, wow, we're doing all this stuff to get more money to get a better exit, but you're just building a better business. Like, by focusing on these things, you're making a stronger business. Whether you exit or not, you're making a business that has less risk and has more staying power. What do you think of that?
I think that's exactly it. I was when you were sharing that, I couldn't help but think about Mike Tyson's line of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the
They get punched in
face.
the face, yeah.
Yeah. But it's kind of the same in that you shouldn't be thinking just about the strategy for exit in a 3 or 6 month or even 12-month or 2-year period. It's build the business as if it were a sellable asset today. And if that opportunity presents itself, fantastic, but you're never actually going to go wrong unless your business, there's nothing bad that can happen in the statement that you just shared. And it really resonates with me. And I think for all of us founders out there, that should be what you live by, is not let's wait for some sort of event to say, right, I really, I want to buy that dream home, or I want to do, I want to drive toward this. Really invest the time to make it as close to quote unquote perfect as you can. And when that opportunity presents itself, you're always ready for it.
Right. Exactly. So let's just get to pragmatics here. E-commerce business, kind of wondering where do they start in terms of just doing the right thing by their business to help it be scalable and ultimately exitable. Like where would you start with some? Because I know that, like, say even the businesses that you have, approach an e-com business from different standpoints. Like on the one hand, building teams; on another hand, building the SOPs and processes; on the other hand, getting directly involved to help them grow it. So like you approach it from different angles. So if you're an e-com seller, just wondering like, where do I start? Like, what's the best advice you can give to them?
So I would say that ultimately depends on what stage of your journey you're on. I would say if I were to look into someone who's never sold online in their life and we're looking to build their first brand, decide what their first product is, I think it stays true at every step of the journey, but make sure that there is enough margin inside of whatever it is you're building for it to make sense. Because the second, particularly with e-commerce, the second that it doesn't, that becomes an unsellable asset, unsellable brand, unless you're sort of sitting, I'd say at the minimum 15% profit margin, but realistically, you're going to want to hit sort of at least 20 is where things start to get really interesting. So I would say that would be the first thing. Make sure that what you're building toward actually has a future from an exit standpoint. And maybe that's not necessarily the same for every single business and every single vertical, because, I would say there are businesses where they cash flow, you're not going to have such big problems, and you might just want to hold on to it. And that's a beautiful thing. But specifically for e-commerce, it is a cash intensive game. And it's something that if you don't build those things in, you don't have that liquidity event, it can go pretty awry pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just go in a different direction here, like as a final topic. And so, everything we've been talking about here today in terms of increasing value have to do with kind of processes and ways in which you work on the business and set things up. Now, at the same time, though, you and I know each other from attending like Amazon events, like say networking events. So, unexpectedly, with a business that's so much about like you behind the computer and creating processes, et cetera, it matters quite a bit, like who you know and like who you get to know and the community that you have around you. So I'm curious from your standpoint, like how do you see that is important to sellers in terms of networking and community and such?
Well, you know what they say, Rich, your network is your net worth.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I'm a big believer in that. It might just be because I'm very extroverted and I love to be around people. but I think in reality, for me on a personal level, I find myself in places meeting with really interesting, intelligent people. Just before we even started this call, I was asking Rich what's up and what's new. And he had so much to share about just all these new initiatives and educational experiences and communities that he's touching on. And if I didn't have Rich as, a friend in the space and someone that I can sit and pick up the phone to and chat to every so often, I wouldn't have learned something that, who knows, we could get on this podcast a year from now and it's a material step change in my entire business. And it was all because I decided to ask Rich, hey, well, what's been going on in your world and what's new? So, I'm just really sharing with you that I think that it is such an integral part of my personal and professional growth and development. I also think that, us in the e-commerce space, it's a privilege that it's not just people that I'm doing business with, but it's people that I genuinely like to hang out with. I've got to say, for anyone who is listening today and does get to prosper, getting to Rich's event every year, it is the classiest event in Vegas. So, you know what? I'm going to give you a plug here, Rich. And he's not paying me for this, I promise you. But every year they do it at the MGM. It is I didn't know this until the last event that I was at there. But it was Barbara Streisand's room that when she had residency, it's the only one on the floor that hasn't been converted. And the first 2 or 3 years, I was like, why did they pick this? Why this room? I'd been to other floors, and one of the bartenders, I think it was at the high-end tequila bar upstairs. Again, see, another class here. He was explaining to me that actually it stayed exactly the same. So, that event, I get so much value out of just the people that Rich has inside of his inner circle. And, it's had a material impact on the relationships, the learning. And I would say just as well, even new business opportunities come on the back of building these relationships. So, I've very long-winded answer, but I think it's really, really important. And I think more people should invest in it and invest in themselves and enjoy it while they go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that answer. I love every bit of it. And if people want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, how do they go about doing so?
Yeah, you can find me at any of my websites, as in Yoni at multiplyMii.com, weareescala.com, or southcol.co. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So Yoni Kozminski, that's probably the easiest way, even though it's a hard name to remember. That's probably going to be the best way to get me.
Awesome. Well, Yoni, I really appreciate you taking the time to come back to the podcast and talk about exits and everything that you've been up to. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Rich. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.